I want to welcome you here. Many of you I know, some of you I want to meet, but not leaving out anyone in that, by the way. That's the entire population. There isn't people I don't know and I don't want to meet. So I'm Brig Daniels. I'm a professor here at S.J. Quinney College of Law. I would like to welcome all of our guests here in person, and I would also like to welcome all of our online viewers as well on behalf of the S.J. Quinney College of Law and the Wallace Stegner Center. As we traditionally do, we begin by acknowledging that this land, which was named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between the many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach. Before we begin, I would like to just alert you to a number of future events. First of all, on November 9th, at the same time, same place, 12:15 here, our annual Young Scholar, Alex Irwin, JD, PhD, Assistant Professor of Law from Florida International University, will be joining to discuss litigating predator management. On November 15th, at the same time, same place, Laboratories of the Future, Tribes and Rights of Nature with Dean Elizabeth Cronk Warner, who will discuss a paper she co-authored with recent graduate Jensen Lilliquist, class of 2023, published in the California Law Review, a paper that compares the rights in nature in international, federal, state, and tribal contexts. This lecture is co-sponsored with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Utah Law for Native American Heritage Month. And finally, on March 14th through 15th, we look forward to having you here in a packed room for our annual symposium, the 29th of its kind, focused on the transition to renewable energy, how to build a bright future. More details will be forthcoming, and we're excited about releasing them soon. Today's Greenbag panel is, as you can see from the introductory slide, is going to be focused on Living River, the promise of the mighty Colorado. I'll introduce our guest here in a moment. Before I do that, I'd like to just note a couple of other things. First, a thank you to our donors. If you would, please join me in thanking the Cultural Vision Fund, whose generous support of the Stegner Center has made it possible to bring our guest, Dave Showalter, to Salt Lake City and to host this presentation. Thank you, Cultural Vision Fund. Also, we're noting that King's English Bookshop has joined us today and has copies of Dave Showalter's book, which are available for sale here in our lobby. There's a note here, Dave, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn when I say this. He may be willing to sign the books after the presentation. I got an affirmative yes to that. Excellent. After the talk, we're going to have a question-answer session. If you have any questions, or make sure I've got this right, we go to slido.com, #Stegner. Slido.com, #Stegner. You'll see that come up during the Q&A, slido.com, #Stegner. That will allow you to put together a question, whether you're here in person or like the more than 200 of us that registered ahead of time are joining us online. You all will be able to ask questions there. Also, if you go there, if you don't have a question, if you like a question that was asked, you can give it the thumbs up, and I will be quite deferential to the audience's vote about which questions to go to first on slido.com, #Stegner. So today we are joined by conservation photographer Dave Showalter for a unique in-person event, an epic visual journey throughout the vast Colorado River watershed. Dave's Showalter's new book, which is again available in the lobby, The Living River and the Promise of the Colorado, the Living River and the Promise of the Mighty Colorado, paints a galvanizing picture of living in the living Colorado River and the challenges it faces, and will inspire people of all walks of life to cherish and protect life, beauty, and resilience of this dynamic life force. This is not the first time that Dave has joined us, but today is particularly important as 7 states of the century-old Colorado Compact renegotiation of the river's management guidelines, which expire in 2026, are ongoing. Living Riverjourneys throughout the endangered Colorado River from the source of sea, and illustrates how we can create a resilient watershed by changing our relationship with water. Now, to our speaker specifically, Dave Showalter is a conservation photographer who is focused on the American West. Dave's works throughout the ecosystem of the Intermountain West and has published 2 books prior to Living River: Sage Spirit, The American West at the Crossroads by Braided River, and Prairie Thunder, The Colorado River's Great Plains by Skyline Press. Dave is a senior fellow in the International League of Conservation Photographers and a longtime contributor and partner of the White Basin Time Lapse. Dave also works in partnership with numerous conservation groups, including Audubon Rockies, the Nature Conservancy, and Trout Unlimited Headwaters chapters on the Living River Project. With Living Rivers and the conservation storytelling, Dave seeks to take readers on a journey to see ourselves as part of nature and a community of all living things, engendering empathy, caring, love of the natural world, and the genesis of the meaning of conservation. Dave is based in Arvada, Colorado. His website is www.livingrivercolorado.org. We're so glad to welcome back Dave Showalter to the Stegner Center. Let's give him a hand as he comes up.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. And gosh, it's an honor to be back. It's also great to always great to be asked back to places. And this is a wonderful venue and a wonderful experience for me as a presenter to be a part of this series. So let's get started. We're going to celebrate the Colorado River, but first, just a little background. As Brigham just mentioned, I did a multi-year project on the Colorado Prairie called Prairie Thunder. That book was published in 2007. A lot of that work was done really close to home at Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge near Denver, where bison were reintroduced after a 150-year absence. And then I followed that up with a project through another landscape that folks call drive-through country, the Sagebrush Sea. And that story was constructed around the lives of greater sage-grouse and their role as an umbrella species for 350 other creatures, including us. And this is what it's like for me in the field a lot of the time. Fancy dirt bags, sleeping in my truck, eating organic groceries out of a Yeti cooler. Where I work is not close to a town typically. I just want to plant a seed here with this image. This thread, this thin line, this life force is all we have for 40 million of us and all the economies of this part of the American West. This is it. And we hear a lot of stories. Why did I call the book Living River? Well, in the beginning, there was a confluence of events, and then I heard an expert who should have known better say the river is dying. And I thought, holy cow, that's not my experience. Wherever there's flow, wherever there's water, there is life. And but we know the story today. The Colorado River is in crisis. We're having difficulty delivering water to people downstream. Here we look at Lake Powell at a time when it was really low. Last year it was at about 27% of capacity. And Lake Powell catches all the water that Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico send downstream to the lower basin states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and the two Mexican states of Sonora and Baja. Then we send the water through the Grand Canyon, and it goes to Lake Mead, and that's where it's stored and delivered to those lower basin states. Lake Mead was in similar shape last year. Both of these big reservoirs were on the verge of collapse when I was there in late July last year. And these are hard scenes to look at sometimes. A 1960s speedboat moored in the bottom of Lake Mead was under 150 feet of water less than 10 years ago. And this is the scene a year ago, July, nice 108-degree evening. Everything in this scene would have been underwater when the lake was more full. I should say reservoir. And we have big questions. There's 6 million people attached to the Central Arizona project that connects the big cities in Arizona. So the canal runs from Lake Havasu to Phoenix and on to Tucson. It's 336 miles long. And how are we going to continue supporting those Arizona economies in the big cities? And what's growth going to look like in the future? A lot of that growth is hitched to our attraction to green Kentucky bluegrass in our yards, you know. We know that 80% of the river goes to agriculture. And how are we going to get more efficient in the Yuma lettuce fields that supply all of the greens for North America, virtually all of the greens, in winter? So if you eat a salad in winter in North America, no matter where you are, you're eating the Colorado River. How are we going to change things up with agriculture? So we know these things, and we know the river's in crisis, but have you been to the river? Have you been to the headwaters of the Colorado River in Rocky Mountain National Park on a cool spring morning where the river is starting to pick up pace with runoff and flowing from the Never Summer Range? Have you been to the headwaters of the Green River, where that great river, the biggest tributary of the Colorado, starts as a river of ice at Stroud Glacier? And indeed, 4 great river systems of North America are born in this Wind River Range, not far from here. Have you stood at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and taken in a third of the world's history and the power and intention of the great river to reach the sea? Have you floated the Yampa through Dinosaur National Monument and felt compelled to kiss the Tiger Wall because river lore says that'll give you safe passage through the rapids downstream? Now, I have kissed that wall, and it's a little rough, but that is the tradition, so you do it anyway. Have you seen the river double back on itself? And looking into the cool twilight hours of the upper Gila River where it runs wild and free, the way I think about it is it's our relationship to water in the West that needs to be reimagined. We can't do things the way we've always done them, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have to recalibrate to the river we have. And the reason we're in the shape we're in is because the river's been over-allocated for so long, and we're just digging a deeper hole. We can't work that way anymore. So things need to change. My journey officially began 7 years on this project, 7 years ago, but it was a lot longer ago than that when my wife Marla and I were roaming the high passes of the Rockies and going in between drainages of different watersheds. And in 2011, there was this really powerful moment when we had tried 4 or 5 times that winter to make the top of James Peak, which is just west of Denver and separates the Platte and Colorado River basins, 13,286 feet. We were blown off the mountain every time. We never made it until the very last day of winter. We made the top, and that was an afternoon summit, so we went up there for sunset. And standing there in that moment, looking towards Long's Peak at the top of the frame, that's the highest peak in Rocky Mountain National Park, and all across all of those ridges covered in snow, I thought, holy cow, this is all the water we have for the coming year. This is it. And interestingly, 2011, last day of winter 2011 is the closest analog we have to the last winter where it was a lot of snowpack, 150% or so, lingering snow and cold into spring, which were great conditions for the rivers. All the snow we have for the year. Everything on the right will flow to the Platte. Everything on the left will flow to the Fraser, first tributary of the Colorado, and onto the Colorado River. And it's a wonderful place to explore on skis and snowshoes and go look for white-tailed ptarmigan, these camouflage specialists that spend their whole life cycle above timberline in the Rocky Mountains. And their survival strategy in winter is to bury themselves in snow when it's really cold, and they eat almost exclusively those little tiny willow buds on the alpine willow to survive winter. And in the summertime, they look like rocks. Now, similarly, the American pika uses snowpack too. They do not hibernate, but they gather this huge larder of hay, this big pile of forbs and grasses in the summertime, and they are living underneath the snowpack as insulation for their survival through winter. So in a very real sense, these animals depend on snowpack for their survival, and so do we. No separation. At Winter Park Ski Area, just over the mountains from Denver, right here in this lower right corner, is a collection facility. And in these headwaters, every single crease in the mountains has a diversion structure on it that diverts the creeks and the streams to this place. And there's also some tunneling that goes underneath the mountains. There's one place where the same water crosses underneath the Continental Divide 3 times. Heavily diverted. And the Fraser River, the first tributary of the Colorado, 60% of that river gets diverted to Denver. And it goes through the Rocky Mountains. There's a second bore on the Moffett Tunnel. One side is a train bore, one side is a water bore. Joins South Boulder Creek and heads on down to Denver to power Denver's economies and water our lawns and our golf courses. And that the relationship between the folks in the Fraser Valley and Denver water was pretty acrimonious for a long time, but that's been changing, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Our maps are all drawn in this same style. For this particular map, we show the Colorado reaching the sea, which is important, even though folks will tell you it dries up in the desert sands in Mexico. We show the diversions where the water gets diverted out of the actual watershed. If you just look at the polygon itself, the big yellow polygon, that's connecting all the high points. That's how a watershed is drawn. The boundaries are drawn. Connect all the high points. Think mountaintops, mountain ridges around the watershed, and then everything that flows into that space or melts from the mountains goes into the big river. We show the major tributaries. Salt Lake is one of the cities on there. Salt Lake gets water from the Duchesne, or the Wasatch Front from the Duchesne River, which is a tributary of the Green. But this is another way to look at a watershed. So here we see all those creeks and streams and tributary rivers flowing to the big river. All of that pulse and energy and flow flows to the big river. And the way I think of it is like a human heart or a human nervous system or mycelium crawling across the forest floor. And it gives you a greater sense, I think, of the life force. And everywhere water flows, there is life, including our own. The river starts really humbly in Rocky Mountain National Park. In the very headwaters, when it comes out of the Never Summer Range, you can jump over the river in the summertime. And I featured river keepers in this book. I felt it was really important to tell stories through people who are doing great work, to draw inspiration from these folks like Kirk Clanky. I asked Kirk, what's your relationship to the Fraser River? And Kirk said, well, you can't stand in a river for 40 years and not have a relationship to it. He's the president of Trout Unlimited Headwaters chapter and a leader in the community. And Kirk's had an ongoing conversation with Denver Water. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it was acrimonious for a very long time, but eventually folks started to listen and they started to collaborate and work together. And it wasn't but a couple of years ago that this scene had heavy equipment in the river to dredge out the channel to make it healthier for trout and establish point bars and restore the willow from a nearby creek. And then we went back and we did a biomass study, and we had, this is community, right? Community is where it's at in conservation. So we had Trout Unlimited and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and yes, Denver Water and volunteers and kids all in the river together. And here's John Ewert, the state biologist who works in the headwaters with a nice brown trout. What was really cool was there was new fry, so the fish were reproducing in this restored part of the Fraser River. And that's how it's done, in making places healthy as you can, one little incremental piece at a time. And those birds sure love the willow. Here's a yellow warbler singing his head off, protecting nesting territories. It's a really cool space. Just upstream, Clean water indicators, the American dipper, our only aquatic songbird. They eat the same stuff trout do. And here's an American dipper with a nice gob of insect larvae, aquatic insect larvae that he plucked off a rock in the stream. So these guys tell us, yes, this piece of the river is in really great shape. The fire is a big deal. You guys know about that here in Utah. Big threat to our rivers. Here we see the Colorado River coming out of Rocky Mountain National Park and entering the first subdivision that was completely wiped out by the East Troublesome Fire. And then the forest starts to come back, and Monument Plant is the first plant to return in this case, to start to return life to that scorched forest. And that was a huge, massive event, 100-mile-an-hour winds, late October when it should have been snowing, should not have been a fire season, but that's the times we're in. The Greenwater headwaters, this is Peak Lake, Sulphur and Stroud Peaks. Just around the corner to the left is Stroud Glacier. That's the official headwaters of the Green. And the Green goes through some farmlands after it leaves the mountains and hits the first dam, or the northernmost dam in the Colorado River system, Fontenelle Dam and Reservoir. And then you see the Green River flowing out of there. Right below the right below the reservoir is Seeds-Cadee National Wildlife Refuge. Tom Kerner is the refuge manager. I was just over with Tom yesterday because I came that way and went through Seeds-Cadee, and it's spectacular right now. The kokanee salmon are running. Tom, you see, has a camera. So as refuge manager, he rides around with a camera and a long lens next to him, and he makes amazing pictures and he posts them. And so he's an ambassador for his own refuge, and he does lots of habitat treatments, and he really focuses on habitat drivers. And when you're below a dam and the river's no longer allowed to flood, those drivers are often cottonwood and willow. So you need that woody structure to have the full suite of species that are supposed to be there and to stabilize riverbanks and so forth. So here Russ is trimming willow to be staked riverside, and this willow has flourished since this happened. And lots of animals eat the willow. Birds need very specific structure as they move around in the west. Seeds-Cadee is a Shoshone name for river of sage grouse. And on 3 consecutive mornings, I watched this little group of sage grouse gather on the rim of the river, and they flew across the river right at sunrise and underneath an eagle's nest to feed in a wet meadow. It didn't make any sense to me, but the species have evolved together over a millennia, and here we see 3 chicks and then a nice delivery of a white sucker by one of the parents. It's a magical place. One of the things the dam does do that helps out wildlife is it keeps the river channel open in the winter. So trumpeter swans thrive there. There's 300 trumpeter swans. It's a really big stronghold for trumpeter swans, our largest waterfowl species. And then about a dozen pairs stick around through the summer months and raise their cygnets on Seeds-Cadee waters. The guy on the right has a collar. For reasons nobody knows, a couple of the trumpeter swans took off on migration to the Grand Canyon. And they flew to the Grand Canyon, and telemetry collar followed their journey, and then they came back. Nobody knows why they did that, but it's pretty neat when animals connect the whole watershed for you. And there's a healthy population of river otters, again, another clean water indicator, and this guy's eating American whitefish, a native fish. Rough-legged hawks in the winter, they spend breeding season in the Arctic, and then they come down to the prairies in the sage, the wide open landscape in the wintertime. Kokanee salmon right now are running from Flaming Gorge upstream to Seeds-Cadee and spawning and dying. They're not a native species, but they really do no harm. What they do is they contribute a lot of biomass to the river system. On one of my trips to Seeds-Cadee, I arrived and there were some fishermen in the parking lot, and I was introduced to a guy, and he pulls out his phone and he goes, "Check this out." And I get a lot of that as a photographer. And it was this amazing picture of a bobcat, and it was framed in an arched cave with a black background, and I thought, I'm going to find those bobcats. And I kind of scrapped my plans, and I went searching, and I found her, and then there was 3 kittens, and they individually marched across this really steep face. I was all camoed up and just taking it all in and kind of holding my breath as they went along the cliff face, and then I watched one of the young nurse as it was getting really dark. So that was a magical experience. And this is the bluff that I was on. I kept traversing up and down this bluff. I had this goofy domestic sheep that had somehow been left behind, and he would lead me down the trail and give me some side eye. It was really it was an interesting week. But boy, there was a lot of wildlife. You know, when you're traveling along rivers, you see lots of other things. And so prairie falcons were screeching overhead, and they were making sorties with food deliveries to 3 or 4 chicks, I couldn't tell, up on a scrape right above the river. They were delivering ground squirrels and chipmunks. So interestingly, the bobcats and the prairie falcons were using both sage and river and feeding the same prey to their young. And then in marsh wrens in the wetlands, just a plethora of wildlife. Let's go to Utah. Southeast Utah, I was invited to the 2019 summer gathering put on by Utah Denebekea, which is based in Salt Lake City. And that's the 5-tribe coalition for the protection of bear's ears. History of bear's ears is long. Think of it as the cultural and spiritual center for indigenous folks with ties to this region in southeast Utah. It was protected as a national monument under the Obama administration, eviscerated under the Trump administration, and then restored under the Biden administration. The Native Americans have a whole different perspective on that, and said to me, you know, we've had our land stolen by many American presidents. But these folks that didn't used to get along, these 5 tribes, have bonded together and done an amazing job. And now we're looking at co-tribal management for bear's ears. The true boundaries that were originally suggested for bear's ears were established by mapping the vegetation plots of the ancient Puebloans, so where they irrigated and grew crops. And it's a remarkable place. It has the greatest archaeological record in the West. We don't say ruins anymore, we say dwellings. And these are sacred sites. The people are still here. They didn't somehow just disappear. Just remarkable. San Juan River is there, carved the goosenecks, and you see Monument Valley off in the distance. The bear's ears are the bear's ears are actually these 2 sandstone buttes. You can see them from everywhere in the region. So they're kind of the cornerstone. But again, I think of it more as the whole giant region, not a square or an outline on a map. Done a good bit of work with Cynthia Wilson and her family and some other folks in the Monument Valley region. So from that original meeting in Utah Denebekea, I was introduced to Cynthia, welcomed to her home. This is her hogan, which is the womb of Mother Earth. It is lined on the inside by stripped juniper that was harvested from bear's ears, and she is holding bear's ears potatoes, which are one of the crops of the ancestors. And it's a very nutritious and climate resilient crop. And so Cynthia was the traditional foods coordinator for Utah Denebekea, helping other families grow their traditional foods gardens. I was also introduced to Ann Castle, who's become a dear friend. Ann is now she's been appointed by President Biden as the Upper Colorado River Basin Commissioner, who is renegotiating the terms of the Colorado River Compact. During the pandemic, Ann and her colleague, Bitta Becker, who is Navajo Dene, saw an extreme need for water access and sanitation for indigenous people because they were getting hit really hard by the pandemic. Indigenous people in this region are 19 times less likely to have access to clean water than Anglo people. And so Ann and her colleague got funding through the Infrastructure Act and are working really hard to gain access or better access to clean water for indigenous folks. And so because of working with Ann and this whole business, I thought, well, I need to make some pictures of what it's like for Navajo people living on the reservation. This is Henry Wilson Sr., Cynthia's father, collecting water, which he does every day. Has to have a dedicated 3/4-ton pickup truck, a 325-gallon tank. The hose is a little garden hose behind Goulding's in Monument Valley. Takes about a half hour to fill the tank, and you can see with the line is 5 trucks here, so 2.5 hours just to get water for the day, and then it goes home and gets distributed. The irrigation system wasn't distributing evenly, so the people are distributing evenly, watering each plant. That's Eloise in the foreground, Cynthia's mom, and her family in the background. And then I went back a month later, and it was a celebratory time because corn was knee-high and everything was growing, the potatoes, the squash, beans, and the corn. And the family we were cutting up. I think what I was trying to say, I said, tell me how to say cheese in Dene. And I didn't get it quite right, so I had them laughing pretty good. But it's great fun. And it's such an honor to work with these folks and to be a friend and be invited back. And it's been one of the greatest gifts of this project. The Gila River in southwest New Mexico flows out of the Mogollon Range, Gila Wilderness, Aldo Leopold Wilderness. All this connected wilderness is a massive landscape, a couple million acres. And in the early 1960s was set to be dammed in its headwaters with this water diverted. And it's a very flashy river, and it was going to be dammed right here where Martha is at the gauge for the river. And Martha is with the Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy has a farm there on the Gila. And so she has a seat at the table with the irrigators, and together over time, building relationships, building community, they were able to agree on a preferred alternative to a dam. And in 2020, Michelle Lujan, the governor of New Mexico, stopped the dam. This is one of the wildest places in North America in terms of biodiversity or wildlife richness. So we thank Martha for her efforts. She's an incredible human being, and what a place it is with wintering sandhill cranes. Some of them leak south from Bosque del Apache and spend winter on the Gila, and incredible cottonwood gallery forests that hold tons and tons of life. And here in this scene, you see on the top the yellow is the Gila River, because that's a free-flowing year-round river, and so that's all cottonwoods for the most part, a few sycamores. And in the foreground are more sycamores on Mogollon Creek, because Mogollon Creek is ephemeral. It's a flashy creek, so it doesn't have cottonwoods. It's kind of a neat look at that landscape. The Mogollon people used to be here up in Mogollon Cliffs National Monument, and left their record behind. Right at the same time, the ancestral Puebloans were in southeast Utah. Great place for birds, all kinds of birds. Penapepla in elderberry on the Nature Conservancy land. And endangered southwest willow flycatcher, just a little bit bigger than a couple of cottonwood leaves. They have this really cool call, Fitzbew, but they're maddening as a photographer because they're buzzing around at the very top of the tree canopy. Every once in a while, one will come down and you'll have a chance to make an image. Beavers don't build lodges. They are bank dwellers on these flash flood-prone rivers. So they dig holes in the banks on the Gila River, doing pretty well. Quadamundi in a hawthorn tree, desert hawthorn tree. And the Gila always seems to give a gift. I was leaving, and I have these little rituals I do, sometimes tearful goodbyes to a river when I've been there for a week or two. And I had heard the sandhill cranes for a week, but they were hidden in pasture grass, and I never saw them. And then at the very end, as I was saying goodbye, this pair lifted off and flew across that beautiful backdrop of autumn colors. A Gila gift. There's a lot more cranes just a little bit to the southwest, south of Wilcox. There's about 40,000 cranes that gather in winter, and this is at Whitewater Draw, Huachuca Mountains in the background, about 2 or 3 miles from the Mexican border. There were 25,000 cranes there, and they're there right now, or they're gathering there right now, starting to. I was with Holly Richter 2 weeks ago on the San Pedro River, and Holly's a PhD hydrologist, was working for the Nature Conservancy at the time. She's now freelancing, but just this incredible person who has built this great community in the San Pedro. And the thing about the San Pedro is it's got a lot of dry sections. It's been sort of the rug's been pulled out from underneath it with 40 years of unfettered groundwater pumping. It's drawn the river down. So we're looking at the water table of the river. So there's dry and wet patches, but the river is north and south oriented, and it starts in Mexico. It's one of only two rivers. The other one is the Santa Cruz that flows across the border and flows north, and it's a tributary of the Gila. And so it's considered to be hemispherically important for birds, in large part because of that north-south orientation. What happens is water gets infiltrated into the aquifer to raise the water table. There's also Fort Huachuca Army Base there, which is a huge army base, the big economic driver for the San Pedro watershed. So, you know, folks got to figure it out. This is a very real instance where literally all those lives in that part of the watershed are hitched to this little river. But it is powerful when it flash floods. It's really, here's the border, of course. You can see the cottonwoods in the distance are the San Pedro River. And when I was there the first time, there was just these crisscross bollards that were about waist high, so animals could cross at the river. And there was Border Patrol just sitting right there. And last week I went back and I had to walk in because you can't get there by vehicle anymore. Border Patrol doesn't want you down there. And I walked in through the National Riparian Conservation Area, which is a protected land on both sides of the river. And now there's a bridge and there's lights and it's all changed. So it's not for the benefit of wildlife, for sure. And these are the original groundwater pumps, but now a lot of these guys are drying out because there's big cheese factories and such nearby that are drilling really deep, and the unstopped groundwater pumping is still going on. The birds are there though. The Gila woodpecker are one of the endemic birds in the San Pedro, and these are yellow chats. You pretty much only see these guys like in May when they're singing for a mate. They're very reclusive songbird, really cool songbird. And then if you go up in the Sky Islands have like stratified biomes where as you go up in elevation, you have unique plant communities and unique wildlife species. And here I'm on top of Coronado Peak and Coronado National Monument. And the border wall is right there, and the San Pedro is like right here. And Mexico off in the distance, big old grassland on top, just a really wonderful, beautiful, peaceful, quiet place. And that's my big takeaway from the border. You know, if you turn off the news and you go have that experience yourself, it is completely magical. They're just beautiful and wildlife rich and fabulous. So one of those unique species in the Sky Islands is the Coues deer. They're about a waist-high elfin white-tailed deer relative. Backdrop of sycamore and big-tooth maple. Interestingly, the same maples that are bright red right now up City Creek Canyon are right down on the border in the Huachuca Range. And here you can see sycamore and a couple of cottonwoods as Ramsey Creek comes out of the Huachuca Mountains. I fly with Lighthawk. I made this Lighthawk flight. They fly just for conservation. I made it largely for this picture. At the time I made the picture, this butte right here was to have the Escalade development on it. It's going to be this big tourist development, and there was going to be a tramway that went down to the Colorado. The thing is, so the Colorado River is in shade where that little thin blue artery of the Little Colorado meets the Colorado at its confluence. But the thing is that confluence is sacred to all the Native American people with ties to the Grand Canyon. It's the birthplace of the Hopi and the current homeland of the Navajo people. And thankfully that got stopped. That would not have been good for that space. Allison Holleran runs Audubon Rockies. She wrote a wonderful migration piece for our book and runs raft trips. Why does Audubon, the bird people, run raft trips? Well, all of those birds need that riparian habitat to make their journeys in the West. And then her partner at Audubon Rockies is Abby Burke in the foreground, who, as you can see, is most at home in a kayak. She's a bit of a river nut. She just bought the most beautiful blue or purple kayak that I asked her how many she had. She said, "You don't even want to know how many kayaks I have, Dave." But anyway, she's a hoot on the river, and they run these great trips. This was on the Yampa, my very first trip that really hooked me on this story. And get more people to the river so more people will care. And that's the void we have, is we need more people to care. There's nothing like floating through these spaces, these walls of time in the Grand Canyon. And then here we are at the confluence where we see those aqua blue waters of the Little Colorado that are created by mineral deposits from a spring that's upstream. Sacred, sacred place. Peering down into Deer Creek Slot Canyon. That was a little sketchy with my camera. I stuck the tripod over the edge and, but you got to make the picture. California condors are doing better in the Grand Canyon region. Last year, for the first time ever, there are more birds in the wild than there are in captivity. So they're making progress, sort of one chick at a time. At the start of the pandemic, this is my wife, Marla. She was diagnosed with cancer, and very rare form of sarcoma, the most aggressive and rarest of cancers. And Marla fought so hard. She went through really brutal chemo treatments, and she, as a couple, we were just so much about being in the wilderness and exploring. And I show this image and tell her story because, honestly, I wouldn't be standing here without this spectacular person. She got through the chemo, and in January 1st, 2021, we resumed our tradition of taking in the sunrise of the new year from above timberline. So we would leave in the dark, and we would snowshoe up in the dark in the high mountains and get to 12,000 feet and welcome sunrise of the new year. And Marla had clean scans at that point and was doing great and had regained all her strength. And but the cancer came back, and there was more surgeries and more complications. And Marla passed away in May of 22. It's important to me that I give tribute. She was just the most beautiful, kind, generous, giving soul. She made it possible for me to go full-time as a photographer 16 years ago. And I just have a lot of gratitude in my heart, and it's my great pleasure to share her with you. So now what do? You're almost done with this book project. Your whole world is turned upside down. What do you do now? Marla would say, you got to keep going. She called me Walter. You got to keep going, Walter. So I did. I had not been to Mexico because of the pandemic and all that stuff. There was a lot of plans that I had to let go of, and focus on what was most important for this story. But I did need to get to Mexico. I couldn't write the chapter because I hadn't been there, so I went to Jennifer Pitt, who's got 40 years plus with Audubon in the Colorado River Delta. She's a VP at Audubon. Jennifer graciously sat for an interview with me, and that became our Delta chapter, and it's really beautiful. And she captured, texture and history and lots of things that I could never have known to write about. And, we say that the river dries up in the sands of Mexico, and you can see that it hits the Morelos Dam here, it goes like this, hits the Morelos Dam, gets shunted off to Mexicali agricultural fields. On the lower right is Los Algodones, Mexico. On the left is Yuma lettuce. But it's not dead. There was a leak some years ago in an agricultural pipe on the U.S. side, and that leak became this giant wetland, Cienega de Santa Clara, and it's an enormously important place for wildlife. Now you can see how incredibly lush and green it is. And those lagoons kind of resemble what the Colorado River used to look like when Aldo Leopold wrote about it in Sand County Almanac on his 1922 visit. And then I met with a conservation group, Pro Natura Noreste, and they're part of the Raise the River Alliance, and that's a binational coalition of conservation groups all working to help the river reach the sea again. And they have greenhouses on the restoration sites, and here Dylan has a willow and Mary Lou has a cottonwood, and it's really inspiring to be in these spaces and to see people working so hard to take the floodplain from a place that looks like this, and with a little bit of water, less than 1% of the historic flow, to start to recover the cottonwoods and the willows and the other plants that are supposed to be there. And then this Miguel Alleman site, which is now a mature restoration site, 10 years ago had 23 bird species. 10 years later, it has 123 bird species. 18 million songbirds cross the Colorado River Delta every spring. And they can hopscotch, because they're birds, across these restoration sites. So it's incredible work that they're doing there. And when I look at the tidal flats of the Colorado now, where steamships used to carry goods and people, and I see a scene like this, I see the hopeful impression of the river reaching the sea again. I see the river reaching for the sea again. That's how I interpret it. So is there hope for the Colorado River? You're darn right there's hope for the Colorado River. I would like to think we could draw inspiration from these river keepers that I've featured in this book, these incredible people, each of whom has built their own community around the idea of protecting and conserving a reach of a river, of taking care of your home river. There's a lot of inspiration in that. And I'm not a person to tell you, what conservation group to join or, who to write letters to, but what we can do as individuals is we can go to the river and we can be present with her. And we can stand in a wild river, knee-deep, and feel the pulse and rhythm and dynamic energy of those rivers, because we are pulse and rhythm and energy. And we can learn where our water comes from, and we can go there in person or virtually, and we can stand on that mountaintop. And if we do that, we're going to naturally want to ask the question, well, where does the water go? And how is it used? And if enough people do that, we start to become the river as a watershed community. And that's where it's at. That's what this moment calls for, is we need to become the river, because things are changing rapidly. So become the river. Speak for her. We are the river. Thank you.
Yeah, so just wanted to let folks know, Slido was taking some time to get up and going. It's now up and going, so if you go to slido.com, hashtag Stegner, you put that in, you can put in your question. I'll be looking for questions in the room as well, but we've got a couple online questions already asked, and maybe we can start with those as we're trying to get things moving along. And maybe you answered this in your last little segue, but I'll ask it anyway. It says, you make a good case that the Colorado is a living river. I appreciate how you highlighted people and organizations that are helping protect the Colorado. For those of us who feel some urgency to help the Colorado, what can we do?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as I mentioned, it's not my thing to. It doesn't work in conservation to tell people what to do. I feel like if you engage with the river, as I just described, you'll know what to do. At minimum, like as photographers, we can write better captions when we post images. We can tell a story. As people, we can tell a story. We can bring others on our journey with us. That's what I'm trying to do with this story, is I want to bring you along. I want to take you to the river and say, hey, let's go. I got something really cool I can show you, So the deal is the more we know, the more we care, we start to love the river, then we can, we can bond together and make for real meaningful change. There's 40 million of us. Part of what I wanted to do too was get us to a place where we understand what it's like to be one of 40 million, and to think about our downstream neighbors and think of ourselves as part of a community beyond maybe the Salt Lake City community or the greater Denver community or wherever you happen to be. But we're all, we all live downstream. And so I think the deal is right now is as Ann Castle tells me all the time, we just need more people to care. That's the moment that we're in. I can't tell you to rip out your lawn. Somebody might one day, but that's the moment we're in. We're all going to share in this moment where there's going to be pretty big water cuts coming.
This second question is a bit of a daring question, given the beautiful photography you've shown us. But what was the most impressive thing that you saw in making your book, but were unable to photograph?
Geez, how much time do we have? I don't know. The most impressive thing that I saw that I was unable to photograph, I don't know. I can't imagine that there's a more beautiful watershed on Earth, you know. It's just been such a great privilege to travel around and tell these stories, and I just don't know. I've seen so much beauty. It's bewildering.
Any questions from the room? Yeah. Jonas.
Thanks so much for this. My question is, are there any aspect, it sounds like your job is incredible, you see beautiful things and photograph beautiful images. Are there things about your job you don't like? Is there any reason you would not go into this job if you'd known what it was?
Is there anything I don't like about my job? It's really hard to make a living as a full-time photographer or creator of any kind. So you have to be pretty light on your feet and diversify income streams and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's typically the biggest challenge. I don't know, the thing about it is it's crazy when you look back and you think all of this starts with just a nugget of an idea, and I think the deal is you got to pay attention to those ideas when you have them and act on them. And in the beginning, I just thought, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I just thought, this river system's in trouble. This is the only thing that makes any sense for me to work on right now, and I'll just start. And it took me about 2 years to see most of it and to sort of start a lot of gas and groceries and just to start constructing a plan for how I might tell the story. And it changed. The story changed a lot over that time, and I changed dramatically. The rivers work on you in profound ways, and the metaphors are many. So I veered off course there. It's a great gig, but it has its inherent challenges, yes.
We have one more online question and then one in the house, so let's start there.
I'm Lee Kapolowski. I'm General Counsel to Utah Denebekai, and thank you for that. I just want to make a comment. I was on res last week, ended Navajo Mountain watching the eclipse, working with the tribe on their water rights, and I love what you said about their belief, in their case, the San Juan, which is the more present river, and they have a water code that it recognizes and a constitution the life of the river and the life of habitat. And what you were saying there is very well respected. I'm right in the middle of adjudication on that, and I just want to thank you for talking about Utah Denebekai. The Bears Ears is a very critical element, and we can learn a lot from how they respect the river. So I just want to make that comment.
I'm so happy you're here, and I would love to be in touch going forward. Yeah. I just had speaking of Utah Denebekai, when I started, when I went from that first summer gathering, and I wanted to start working with these great folks in Monument Valley, I asked to meet with Jonah Yellowman, and he is he owns the teepee that was in that picture, and he was in the teepee, and he's a very respected elder and a spiritual leader. And so the very first meeting, I went to his house and met with Jonah. And like 3 weeks ago, I was able to go back and be in Jonah's hogan and with Cynthia and Jonah there. And I was able to take a finished book and say, I brought you a gift of gratitude. And that's just such a great feeling, Yep. Dear friends.
Beautiful, thank you. Do you have plans to explore other areas with your photography, or are you anticipating continuing with the Colorado River?
Thanks for that question. So what I'm doing now is I'm thinking about some offshoot projects, and one that I'm seriously considering is a bird migration story that I'm tentatively calling River of Birds. I have a time-lapse camera on the border that's looking at the San Pedro River, documenting monsoon events, which are big. That's like 60% of the annual rainfall comes from monsoon. But it's really interesting because I just went down there and pulled the first images off the camera, and you can see the water come and fill the channel, and then it just disappears into the aquifer. So I want to study that hydrological cycle, and at the same time, I want to, I want to get into some of this dynamic nature of rivers in a way that isn't necessarily looked at every day. What we need to do collectively as people that are the river is we need to change the narrative. We need to change how we talk about these rivers. We need to really amplify just how important they are in our lives. And as creative folks, I think we have the rare opportunity to maybe show people things that they haven't seen before and kind of turn things on their head a little bit and talk about rivers in a different way. And I think that's a big part of sort of enlightening the 40 million folks. So yeah, a lot more river projects.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. And this couldn't have happened at a better time. I'm actually teaching environmental ethics right now, and we were doing indigenous philosophies this week. And so a lot of the things you were talking, just got done presenting them in class. And one thing that I was really interested to get your opinion on is, because the relational values is really uptaking in conservation biology, that's been sort of taking over the conversation when it comes to value talk. And it's like, we're finally listening to these indigenous peoples and how they sort of go about valuing these things. And I ended the class today with, maybe there's hope on the horizon, because I think it was just this past December, the White House recognized the importance of local knowledge and indigenous knowledge. And I was curious, with your interactions with all these people, if they have seen sort of a change in the narrative of like finally being listened to and those types of things. So,
yeah, so Cynthia was last fall, almost a year ago, I actually went to DC and met with Deb Haaland, the Interior Secretary. So she was on the front end. Even though she's young, she's highly respected. And Navajo people, it's a matrilineal society, so women are listened to and respected, and women matter a lot. And so Cynthia had that meeting, and the folks that I showed here are engaged in those co-tribal management talks. And Bears Ears is kind of a pilot place, right? And now the signs in Bears Ears have all 5 symbols of the 5 tribes on them. People are super proud of that. There's a lot of pride that's being developed around the idea that, yeah, we do have a voice now. And I absolutely get the sense that they feel like they're being listened to. Did I answer your question? You're right on.
Do you do anything with grades kindergarten through 6th grade? I taught a 4th grade class at Rose Park Elementary School for 6 weeks, and the kids didn't know where the water came from. And most interesting, when you're 10 years old, poop is a really big thing. So they didn't know where the toilet went after they flushed it. And to me, if you can get them imprinted on the importance and the beauty of the river through pictures, then they will be guardians of the rivers.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for educating these young folks. So that's just starting for me, and next month I'll be at my daughter Kelly's 5th grade class, giving a talk, and then I want to. So that's just the very beginning, but it's a core part of what I aim to do going forward, is go around schools. Yeah. Everybody, he just said everybody here can do the same thing. And you're absolutely right. The whole conversation begins with, where's my water come from? And it's not the tap, and we have a long ways to go. Even when you look at our changing the narrative, you look at our media, you look at how drought is reported and the words that we use. Drought suggests that it's temporary. Well, we're in a mega drought. Is it really temporary? The climate models say no. The climate models say we're going to have 30% less water in 30 years. So how are we going to respond to that? We better be responding right now. And it is enormously important that we address the void with young people. So thank you.
The last question we'll give to an online participant, which reads, you have an incredible perspective of conservation groups across the West. Where do you see the conservation movement moving forward? Where's it going?
Conservation movement, I don't know that I can speak to the whole conservation movement. Certainly, first of all, thank you to whomever asked that question for the compliment. I think, from my perspective, I see conservation. I'm part of the International League of Conservation Photographers. There's 120 of us in the world. We're all telling stories. We're all collaborating with conservation groups. I do see a lot more collaboration among groups. You might see an organization that's in the lead on an issue, but behind that group, there might be 5 or 6 other groups that are part of a consortium that are also contributing resources. So I think that's a big part of it. I think, it's no longer so siloed where, okay, we do this thing and we've got our funders and that's it. People are working together and talking with one another, sharing knowledge, sharing science. And I think it's that same way in the creative community. In a sense, we all kind of pull each other together. But the folks I work with all know the other folks that I work with, so I think that's a big part of where things are headed with conservation. And I'll just say that, conservation photography is, it's relatively new as a term. Certainly, like Ansel Adams and some folks before him were some of the early pioneers. But all it is really telling stories so people will care. And that can involve lots of different media and lots of different approaches, like, gathering people in an auditorium and just having a nice conversation about how we can make a difference.
Well, let's
Dave Showalter,
a thankful hand of applause. We're so grateful.
Thank you.
Just one last reminder as we're leaving, November 9, we're going to have another lecture here. If you can be here, annual young scholar Alex Irwin will be talking about litigating predator management. And thanks again to the Cultural Vision Fund, and thanks again particularly to our guest, Dave Showalter, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.